Why does your brain forget the exact second you walk through a door? You're holding on to a thought. You're walking toward the kitchen to grab something. You cross the threshold, and it's just gone. That's not a memory failure. Your brain is doing that on purpose. And the reason it does, it reveals something strange about how your mind organizes your entire life. Okay, picture this. You're sitting on the couch, you think, I need my phone charger. You get up, you walk into the bedroom, and now you're just standing there in the middle of the room with absolutely no idea why. You didn't get distracted, nobody talked to you. There was no phone call, no email, no kid yelling your name. You walked from one room to another room. That's it. That's a whole story. And somehow, that was enough to wipe the thought clean out of your head. If this has never happened to you, congratulations. You're unusual because this happens to almost everyone, multiple times a week. Some people call it the kitchen thing. Some people just call it being scatterbrained. Here's the part that should bother you a little though. You weren't doing anything else. You weren't multitasking. You weren't stressed or tired or mentally overloaded. You had exactly one thought in your head, a single, simple intention, and one doorway erased it, not faded it, not blurred it. It just disappeared, like someone reached in and deleted the file. So here's a real question. What is actually happening in your brain in that half second when you cross from one room into another? Because something is clearly going on in there. And it turns out scientists have been curious about exactly the same thing. Turns out this isn't some weird personal glitch. It's common enough and consistent enough that scientists gave it an actual name. It's called the location updating effect. Most people just call it the doorway effect. The person who first studied it formally was a psychologist named Gabriel Radvansky at Notre Dame back in 2011. And what's interesting is he didn't set out to explain why people forget their phone charger. He set out to test something much bigger. He wanted to know how the brain decides what's worth keeping and what's allowed to slip away. His question was simple, even if the answer wasn't. Is it really the doorway doing this, or is it just coincidence, something else going on that happens to look like the doorway's fault? Because think about it. Maybe it's just time passing. Maybe it's just a distraction of walking. Maybe it has nothing to do with rooms at all. To actually answer that, his team needed to isolate the doorway itself, separate it from everything else that happens when you walk somewhere. And to do that, they built something clever, not a real building, a video game. Before we get to the experiment, you need one idea in your head first, because it explains basically everything that's coming next. Your brain doesn't store your day as one long, continuous video. That's not how memory works, even though it feels that way. Instead, your brain is constantly chopping your experience into chunks. Psychologists call this event segmentation. Every time something shifts, your environment, your goal, the task you're doing, your brain quietly closes the chapter you were just in and opens a new one. Think of it like a librarian working nonstop in the background, except instead of sorting books, she's sorting moments. The instant something meaningful changes, she closes one folder and reaches for the next. These chapter breaks have a name too. They're called event boundaries, and your brain creates them way more often than you'd ever guess, dozens of times throughout a single day, most of them so small you never notice. Walking into a different room is one of the cleanest, most obvious boundaries your brain ever encounters. New visual scene, new sounds, new layout, new objects, new possible actions. Your brain takes all of that in almost instantly and decides, okay, this is a new chapter. Then it starts updating its entire model of where you are and what matters right now. And here's a catch. Your intention, the actual thing you were trying to do, was filed under the old chapter. The new chapter doesn't automatically inherit it. It has to be carried over manually, so to speak. And sometimes it just doesn't make the trip. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because the doorway itself isn't really the magic ingredient. What actually matters is the size of the context shift. The doorway just happens to be one of the most reliable, most frequent context shifts in everyday human life. It's abrupt. It's visually obvious. It happens constantly, multiple times an hour for basically every person on the planet. If you swap the doorway for something else that triggers an equally large mental shift, you'd likely see the exact same effect. New environment, new layout, new sensory information flooding in all at once. All of it tells your brain the same thing. This is a new scene. Update the model, recalculate what's relevant. And updating your model of the world is expensive, mentally speaking. Your brain physically can't carry every detail of the old scene forward into the new one. There's a cost to all of it. So your brain prioritizes, it keeps what seems important and lets go of what seems disposable. And apparently, a passing intention, something as small as grab my charger, is one of the very first things to get deprioritized. It's small. It's not urgent. It's not tied to anything dramatic. So when the filing system has to make quick decisions, it's an easy thing to set down. So, back to that video game, Radvansky's team had participants walk through a virtual building, picking up and putting down virtual objects along the way. Some of these walks took them through a doorway into a brand new virtual room. Others kept them walking the exact same distance, but within a single room, no doorway involved at all. Same number of steps, same amount of time elapsed, same basic task. The only difference between the two conditions was whether a doorway happened to be involved. Then the researchers tested recall. Could participants remember the object they just picked up just moments earlier? The results were strikingly clear. When people walked through a doorway, their recall got noticeably worse, compared to walking that exact same distance with no doorway in between. And that ruled out the obvious, boring explanations one by one. It wasn't simply about time passing, because time passed equally in both conditions. It wasn't about distance walked, because the distances were identical. It wasn't even about the strangeness of being in a video game instead of real life, because later studies went on to replicate the same effect with people walking through actual physical doorways in actual physical rooms. The one consistent variable every single time was the boundary itself. Cross into a new space and your memory for what you were just doing takes a measurable hit. Here's the part that should actually make you feel a little better about all of this. You didn't really lose the thought. Not in the way it feels like you did. The intention is technically still in there, somewhere. It's just become harder to retrieve because the cues your brain originally used to access it no longer match your current surroundings. Think about how memory retrieval actually works. For a second, your brain doesn't go searching randomly through every thought you've ever had. That would take forever. Instead, it uses cues, almost like little hooks. Where you were standing, what you were looking at, what else was happening around you at the time. Those cues act as anchors, and they're what pull the memory back up exactly when you need it. When you walked into the bedroom, you left behind nearly every cue connected to that original thought. The couch you were sitting on, the exact layout of the living room, the half-finished sentence running through your head right before you stood up. All of it stayed behind, physically, in the other room. And your brain, now standing in the bedroom, doesn't have those same hooks available to grab onto. That's exactly why so many people instinctively walk back to where they were standing when this happens. And notice, it almost always works. The second you're back in that spot, surrounded by the original cues, the thought reappears. Almost like it never left in the first place. So really, This isn't deletion, it's misfiling. The thought is still sitting in its folder, completely intact. You just happen to be standing in a room that doesn't currently have that particular folder open. Once you understand what's actually triggering this, you start noticing it absolutely everywhere. Because physical rooms are just one type of boundary. Your brain treats a lot of very different situations the exact same way. Ever get interrupted mid-sentence and lose a thought completely, like it just evaporated? Same exact mechanism. The interruption created a brand new event boundary, and your brain quietly started a new chapter before you'd even finish the old one. Ever open your phone to do one specific thing, check one notification, send one message, and then 10 minutes later, you're scrolling something completely unrelated with zero memory of what you originally opened the phone for? Same thing again. The home screen, the app icons, the scrolling feed, all of that together creates enough of a context shift to bump your original intention right out of easy reach. Even switching topics mid-conversation can do it. You're halfway through making a point, somebody else jumps in with something unrelated, and by the time the conversation loops back around to you, you've completely lost your thread. You know you were saying something important. You just can't get back to it. None of these examples involve an actual doorway. Not one, but every single one of them involves the same basic ingredient. A sharp enough shift in context that your brain decides it's officially time to close one folder and open another. If you feel like this happens to you constantly, more than it seems to happen to other people around you, you might genuinely be onto something. And it's probably not because your memory is somehow worse than theirs. It really comes down to something called working memory load. Working memory is the small amount of mental space you use to actively hold on to things, like an intention you haven't acted on yet. And crucially, that space is limited for absolutely everyone, no exceptions. People who are juggling more tasks at once, heavily multitasking, or carrying more stress day to day tend to have less working memory available at any given moment. And with less working memory available, intentions become much easier to bump out the instant a new event boundary shows up. So if you're the kind of person who's constantly switching between tasks, constantly mentally double booked, juggling 5 things that all feel urgent, this really isn't some character flaw. It's closer to simple math. Less available mental capacity means intentions get knocked loose more easily, more often, by smaller and smaller triggers. So, is there anything you can actually do about it? Or is this just a permanent feature of having a brain? Turns out, yes, there's something you can do. And the fix is almost suspiciously simple. Psychologists call it forming an implementation intention. Basically, instead of just thinking, I need my charger as a vague, fleeting impulse, you say it out loud, specifically, right before you move. Something like, I am walking to the bedroom right now to get my charger. Studies on implementation intentions have consistently found that this kind of specific, verbalized plan creates a noticeably stronger memory trace. One that's far more resistant to getting knocked loose by a new event boundary. You're essentially handing your brain a stronger anchor before the room even changes, instead of trying to carry a vague, fragile intention with no anchor at all. It's such a small adjustment, a few extra words spoken out loud before you even take the first step. But it works precisely because it's solving the actual underlying problem. It's not about fighting the doorway or willing yourself to concentrate harder. It's about giving your intention more weight, more structure, before you ever cross the boundary. Here's a bigger thing all of this is actually pointing toward. Your entire life, every single day you've ever lived, isn't stored in your memory as one continuous, unbroken stream of footage. It's stored as thousands and thousands of these event boundaries, stacked end to end, one after another, tiny chapter breaks, constantly being created, each one quietly closing a folder so your brain can open the next. On the surface, that might sound like a flaw, some kind of built in weakness, but it's actually the exact system that lets you have a coherent memory at all. If your brain tried to hold every single moment of your life open simultaneously, with no chapters, no folders, no organization whatsoever, you wouldn't end up with clear, retrievable memories. You'd end up with an undifferentiated blur, one long, shapeless smear with no distinct moments inside it. The doorway effect isn't your memory failing you. It's a small, visible piece of a much bigger filing system, one that's running constantly in the background, almost all of the time, without you ever consciously noticing it. And here's the strange, almost beautiful part. The exact same system that makes you momentarily forget your phone charger is a system that lets you remember your wedding day as one distinct, retrievable memory, instead of one indistinguishable smear stretching endlessly across your entire life. Maybe your brain isn't losing the thought, it's just already moved on to the next room.